Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to our cozy little corner of the internet. I'm Pen and today I'll be reading chapter 6 of Seen and Not Heard by LitaCakes. Just so you know, as always, there are going to be a few trigger warnings for this fic. This chapter has slight trigger warnings of discussion of abuse, lots of crying and slight panic. Hope none of that triggers you, but if it does, please click off now for your own protection because I want to make sure you're safe, okay guys? Anyway, make sure to take care of yourself and let's get right into the fic. Chapter 6. You don't need permission to exist. Arriving at the house was a bit of a culture shock for Izuku. They had a lovely standalone home. It looked to be at least 3 bedrooms. A 3-bedroom home. It wasn't a tiny and cramped apartment where Izuku could suffocate on the isolation and residual anger that seemed to seep out of every piece of wood in the house. When Shota opened the door and Yamada followed him in, Izuku realized he didn't know their house rules yet. He should have asked in the car. Damn it, of course his useless brain would fail him when it was most important. Izuku followed them but stopped at the Genken to take off his shoes. He set them aside behind the door like always, and then looked around. They had slippers, but no clean socks or gloves. Shit. Izuku crouched down to rifle through his backpack to find some. Missing something, Izuku? Mike asked. No, just looking for clean socks and gloves, he explained without looking up as he signed one-handedly. Why? Izuku stopped and stared up at Mike, who had his head cocked to the side and a very confused look on his face. I'm allowed inside without gloves and clean socks? Shota had come back out and silently asking Mike what was going on. Mike blinked a few times, something dark rising behind his eyes. Izuku, why would we force you to wear gloves in the house? Shota's face twitched up in disgust. What was the reason behind something like that? Izuku's brain was breaking. Did they really not know? Had they never been told that quirkless children were full of germs and weak and sickly? He knew his lung disorder was fake, but his parents had told him since the day he was diagnosed that he was weak and sickly, full of germs. I'm quirkless. I don't want your house to be covered in my germs. I shouldn't have clung to Shota like I did. I might get him sick from all my crying. Inko never let me in the house without putting out clean socks and gloves. Both of his guardians looked utterly horrified at what Izuku had just said. Mike even put a hand over his mouth. A second later, Shota was wrapping his whole body around Izuku and pulling him in for a desperate and tight hug. Don't ever say stuff like that again. It's not true, Izuku. Quirkless people are no more germ-filled than anyone else. You aren't going to get me sick. You don't have to put clean socks just so you can walk around the house, and you can touch anything you want with your bare hands, okay? Izuku was sure he'd probably cry if he hadn't already cried himself empty earlier in the evening. So instead, he hung to Shota's side and nodded into the man's shoulder. He had so many more things he had to ask. So many more rules he knew he had to follow, but were those rules also wrong? He knew, of course, that a lot of what his parents did to him was wrong, but he never assumed that his quirkless problems were wrong. Everyone in society followed those beliefs, that he was worthless and sick, gross and horrible. Everyone who knew he was quirkless, at least. Why were these two men different, or was everyone else wrong? Hey, little listener, what's going on in your mind? I can see the gears turning in there. Talk to us. Izuku wiped a stray tear from his face and shrugged. I wasn't sure what the rules were here. The rules? Shota asked, leaning back from the hug. Back at Inko's apartment, when I was home, I had to put shoes on at the door, put clean socks and gloves, and got situated. Do I need to do that here? The two heroes exchanged a worried look, and Mike asked, "What does situated mean, Izuku?" He half a sigh and shrugged yet again as he explained, "I'm quirkless. Quirkless kids are supposed to be seen and not heard. When I came home, Inko put a muzzle on. I would go to my room and change immediately put my dirty clothes in the bin by the door for washing, so that I wouldn't get my germs everywhere." Mike visibly winced and rubbed a hand across his cheek. It was a soothing sort of rub that Izuku was all too familiar with. Shota had a very dark look in his eyes that made Izuku feel scared. If he didn't know it wasn't directed at him, and was pointed at the door right now. It was pointed at the door right now. "No, Izuku," Shota finally said, his voice deep and wrathful. "You will never be made to wear a fucking torture device ever again. You can also stay in whatever clothes makes you feel comfortable whenever, okay?" Izuku nodded. It didn't make sense to him when everyone in his life seemed to agree with Inko, even going as far as to remind him about his disability on a daily basis. As Shota got up, he held out a hand for Izuku to take, and the teen didn't hesitate to take it. Even if he was still a bit shocked from all the changes. He did, however, hesitate to step into the house with dirty socks and just a thin pair of slippers, and bare hands. Even in his own small apartment where he spent the last few months, he'd worn gloves sometimes, not all the time. After all, he was the only one that lived there, but the habit was hard to shake. The kitchen is to the right, the living room is to the left. Your bedroom is upstairs across from ours. You'll have the guest bathroom to yourself, since we have our own. Our office is down here, and the third bedroom has been turned into a home gym, which you're welcome to use once we go over safety. I've been using gym equipment since I was a kid. I took free community classes at a local gym, self-defense, parkour, martial arts, and weightlifting. So that's how you got so good on your feet on those rooftops," Shota mused with a grin. Izuku blushed a little, nodding. "Alright, anyway, this is your room." Shota had led them upstairs as they talked and opened the door to a simple room that was painted a soft grey with navy blue sheets. There was a desk, a TV, and a few shelves. It was more than what Izuku had ever been given. Izuku finally let go of Shota's hands and explored the room. The first thing he checked was if he could fit under the bed. He hadn't needed to hide in his apartment since he was alone, but could he hide again? But now he could hide again. "What are you doing, little listener?" Mike asked from the doorway beside Shota. "Making sure I fit. It makes hiding easier." The men exchanged a look, and Shota sighed. He seemed to be realizing something that Izuku wasn't being told about. Wasn't going to be told about. "Izuku, you won't need to hide unless you really feel the need to. But we will never give you a reason to hide. If you ever feel like hiding, you can come to us so we can help. Can you come to us and tell us so we can help? If you feel like hiding, it might mean that we've upset you, and we don't want to do that, okay?" Mike hadn't done much of the talking since they got off the topic of home rules. He seemed rather emotional off and on, but Shota could tell he was serious about this. Izuku could tell he was serious about this. Izuku scooted out from the bed and nodded. He could try to remember that. Now that he was in his room, though, he assumed that they would leave him there and be left to unpack his things and remain quiet for the evening. Oh, he forgot his things at the door. Izuku turned to ask, only to find his new guardians placing his bags down for him. Izuku smiled behind his mask and signed a "thank you" softly. Mike dipped his head and wandered back downstairs. Shota leaned on the doorway inside. That seemed like a serious concern, but he didn't speak. Instead, he chose a sign. Izuku wondered what sparked that. Maybe just practice? What are the other rules what other rules did Inko have for you in her house? He asked. Izuku frowned, but explained. Since these all seemed to be really normal for him, he didn't seem bothered by someone asking. I had to stay in my room once I got home and ate after I ate dinner, if I got any, until the morning. If I needed something, I stood at my doorway and knocked, waited for her to come. In the morning, she put out breakfast on the table, and sometimes a first aid kit if needed. If I was late to school or got anything below a C, I'd be punished. I told her the classes that I took were all extra studies for school, not gym classes. Truthfully, school bores me. It's too easy. But if I get straight A's, the teachers will say I cheated and failed me. If I behaved and stayed quiet, she left me alone. Inko wasn't hurtful. She just didn't want me to touch anything. I was only allowed to speak if asked for a direct reply. Shota frowned and lifted up his hands to reply. So, your biological father, was your main abuser? Inko just neglected you? You realize that's not any better, right? I guess after he injured me, she kicked him out and things were much better. She stopped using the muzzle because of the scar. She didn't want to risk any medical bills for an infection, and since it basically muted me, she never brought it back out. Does she know you left? Shota asked out loud this time. Izuku shrugged. I didn't leave a note, but I don't think she tried to find me. Honestly, if you look at my address, you might find an empty apartment now. She hated living there. With me gone, she probably left. Or maybe she hasn't even noticed yet. I don't know. She's probably happier now. Izuku watched Shota wince. After a moment, he stepped into the room and crouched down in front of Izuku. Listen to me, Izuku. I want to make something very clear. You, just you, as a person, no matter your quirk status or your health status, or your hair color or your gender or anything that you can use to define a person, you are perfect. And you are enough. Just as you are. Anyone in the world who would be lucky to have you as their son. What Inko and that man did to you was wrong. Whatever they told you, whatever they made you believe, Mike and I will spend the rest of our lives breaking it down to prove them wrong, okay? Izuku's tear ducts must have recovered because he couldn't hold back the wave of tears that crashed into him. His whole body collided with Shota as he clung to him. Shota rocked them back and forth on on the floor of Izuku's new bedroom for what felt like hours, holding him. Izuku barely remembered what this felt like. He had been to actually be comforted. Certainly not since his diagnosis. Shota had been the first, up on that rooftop, to give him any kind of reassurance outside of May's kind words. He was certainly the first adult to do so. After a while, a voice called from downstairs. Mike's voice. Dinner's ready, you two. Come and get it. I made stir-fry. Izuku wiped his sleeve across his face, and Shota chuckled as he reached for a tissue beside from Izuku's bedside table to hand to Izuku. I had a feeling there was going to be a lot of shocking changes. Just tell us if you're ever confused and we'll explain, okay? Izuku nodded. Shota stood up with a little groan and stretched out his spine, which made Izuku giggle a little. Shota just shot him an annoyed glare and wandered out of the room. Izuku followed. Once all downstairs, he discovered the newest problem. The dining room was conjoined with the kitchen. A slight panic set in, but he reminded himself that Shota said to ask when he was confused. Before Shota could get too far into the room, Izuku grabbed the back of his shirt and likely tugged it for attention. He paused when he saw the panic in Izuku's eyes. What's wrong? Am I allowed in the kitchen? Where do I eat? Where do I put my dishes? Am I allowed at the table? Shota frowned and took took Izuku's hand. Mike was looking at them with a curious eye while holding a large set of cooking chopsticks. "You're allowed in any room of the house, Izuku. The only room with an exception is our bedroom, but we only ask that you knock before entering. You can eat with us at the table," Mike interjected in. Or if we have Mike interjected then. "Or if we have movie nights, we can all eat in the living room," Schroeder snorted. That's what Mike said. "Yeah, as for dishes, we usually share the cleaning duties. So once you're done, just wash them up and put them on the rack, okay?" He nodded, followed Schroeder to the table, and waited for the tired hero to point out one of the extra chairs that hopefully wasn't Mike's or Schroeder's usually. Izuku still felt like he was taking up extra space that he didn't have the right to take up in their lives. Every time his brain tried to tell him he was wrong or bad, Mike and Schroeder were quick to fill him with confidence that he wasn't, and it would hopefully sink in, that he did have a right to take up space in someone's life, and they'd willingly accept it. Izuku was sitting on the couch the next morning, reading a book, with Mike grading papers in the chair nearby, when Schroeder walked into the living room. "Izuku?" The teen looked up to tilt his head. "I had a chat with Nezu. He wants to meet you this weekend." Schroeder glanced over to Mike, and Izuku was pretty sure he heard both worry lines in their foreheads already. They were both getting worry lines in their foreheads already. "Second thing I wanted to speak about is school." Izuku watched him sit down carefully on the other side of the coffee table. "The reason we didn't send you back to school today was firstly because you need time to get settled here, but secondly, we need to know if it wasn't only your home life that was hurting you." To be honest, Izuku had never thought about the bullying that happened at school. It was so minor compared to what he had faced at home that he just assumed it was normal for kids to get bullied, even if he was the only one being bullied in his entire class. Izuku looked down at himself, seeing through his own clothes at the scars that lie beneath. There were scars from when he was younger. Not many were from his bullies. Katsuki had left one on his arm, a little starburst. After Izuku's lung disorder diagnosis, Katsuki had protected Izuku from the physical bullying, but not the verbal bullying. He still berated Izuku and threatened him, and even recently told him to jump off a roof. Despite that, Izuku didn't want to get Katsuki in trouble. He didn't understand the boy's actions or words, but that didn't mean he didn't want to get them in trouble. Do I have to tell you names? In all reality, it was everyone. I didn't really want to talk about it. I don't really want to talk about it. It's really okay. I can go back to school to the end of the year. It's almost over anyway. Izuku, Mike gave him a soft look. If people were hurting you at school, we need to report it to the school district, especially if it was the teachers. Can you tell us a little of what happened at your school so we can figure out how to report this? Izuku sighed and set down his book after marking his page. The teachers ignored me, only speaking to me with hand gestures or grunts. And the students were mostly verbal after Inko made me fake my illness. Kachan protected me from the physical, but he was still verbally abusive just like the rest of them. Just, hateful words, spider lilies on my desk, which is part of why I blew up at Eraserhead. What part of the reason why I blew up at Eraserhead was because yesterday Kachan told me to jump off a roof and pray for a quirk in my next life. I was emotional and snapped. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. You're justifiably emotional, Schroeder scoffed. He leaned forward, rubbing his face into his hands. He looked more exhausted than usual, and Izuku wasn't sure if it was his fault or not. Finally, after a deep sigh, Schroeder shook his head. You're not going to go back to that school. I'll burn it down myself if I have to. Izuku blinked, his head ticking to the side in confusion. It seemed every time these two heroes spoke, it confused the poor boy. He wasn't sure how he'd gone his whole life without never finding a single person who spoke like these men did, who believed he was just a normal kid. Okay, Izuku replied dumbly, having little idea of what to say. That seemed to be the end of the conversation, though. Shota nodded once and left the room and headed back towards his office. Mike went back to grading papers after a quick smile, so Izuku assumed that was that and went back to reading. Sunday morning found Izuku working on his laptop while Mike and Shota were making breakfast together. He had a few cases he wanted to wrap up and submit to Shota before the weekend came to a close. They were also meeting Nezu before lunch, and Izuku was using his analysis as a way to calm his pile of nerves before he had to meet with the famous principal of UA High. Izuku had been up since 5 in the morning working on his laptop. When Mike had wandered down into the living room around 6 and found him engrossed, he did little more than to stare at Izuku for a moment and headed into the kitchen. Not long after, Izuku smelled coffee. Shota wandered downstairs at around 6:30 and his eyes squinted at Izuku, but the smell of coffee must have been too alluring, because he went off into the kitchen in short order. By the time Mike peeked his head out of the kitchen doorway, Izuku was packing up the 2 cases, and he just finished and needed to send them off to Shota. Hey, little listener, breakfast is ready. Hope you like waffles. Coming, Mike, Izuku signed over his laptop. Once he hit send, the device was closed and set aside with his bag. He lazily wandered into the kitchen while rubbing his tired eyes. Computer screens seemed to always give him a headache if he stared at them too long. Maybe he should get checked by an eye doctor. Maybe he needs glasses. Being a weak little quirkless kid and all, it wouldn't make sense if his eyes wasn't the best. What are you working on, kid? Shota asked in a sleepy voice. Just stuff, Izuku slurred. The whole room stopped. Izuku just let his hands fall from his face, his eyes wide at the sound of his own voice. It was raspy and quiet. It sounded horrible. But it was his voice. Shota and Mike shared a look that Izuku translated into a faint sense of smugness. Okay, let's sit down and have some breakfast. Izuku nodded and slid into the chair across from Shota, feeling entirely unsure of what the heck just happened. He hadn't even tried to speak in years, not since Hisashi had burned him, but some part of his brain told him that maybe it wasn't because he couldn't, but because he was too scared to. No one commented about his speaking during breakfast. Neither guardian asked Izuku why he suddenly vocalized, or why he hadn't before. Granted, Shota knew from the interview at the police station that he would likely need speech therapy to help with his wounded throat. Izuku had been honest with them the whole time. He knew he wouldn't be able to it wouldn't be easy to readjust his vocal cords to speaking. Once they finished eating, they all washed up their plates and helped Mike put away the dishes once they were dried. It was calming to share duties and chores. It felt like something a family did, something Izuku was unfamiliar with. Izuku, Shota asked as he wiped his hands on the towel to dry them. Izuku looked down at the cabinet. He was just stocking with freshly dried plates. Just so you know, if you want to relearn how to speak, we can set you up for therapy. If not, that's okay too. Whatever makes you the most comfortable. Izuku produced a faint smile behind his mask and shut the cabinet and placed his hands calmly on the counter. He genuinely thought it over. The truth was that it was likely that it would help him in the future to have a voice. Not everyone speaks sign language. In fact, it was pretty uncommon in their region. Izuku had looked up the statistics once, and when he had been teaching himself, so it was hard. So having a voice would be an asset. But did he really feel ready for that? He was ready to pull himself out of his shell and start learning about this new world, full of accepting people. What might. Wow. Okay. He was ready to pull himself out of his shell and start learning what this new world, full of accepting people, might do for him. He mumbled, followed by a quick sign. Therapy, yes. Mike beamed from across the kitchen, and Shredder gave a simple nod. Izuku could tell the man was proud of him, though. His eyes were easy to read in Izuku's mind. After years of reading his parents' moods through just their eyes, their words, their footsteps, and how they carried themselves, reading the two heroes was trivial. The insight it gave him was warming. That they were so honest, so kind, they truly wanted what was best for Izuku, and that he was just swinging along for the ride on the roller coaster of his newfound compassion in his life. Okay, everyone, that was a little bit of a shorter chapter. Once again, that was chapter 6 of Seen and Not Heard by LitaCakes. I hope you guys like that, because I did. Now, I'm going to have to do some reading on this fic, because I'm only up to chapter 8. I've literally only read the next chapter, and that is it. So I'm going to have to do some reading tonight. It's the weekend, so I can afford to stay up to like midnight, 1, maybe 2. Either way, I get to do some reading tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to take care of yourself, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!